This podcast is made possible by your support and your donations. Thank you. And by the purchase of my book called Everyday Buddhism, Real-Life Buddhist Teachings and Practices for Real Change. I will post an affiliate link to the book on Amazon in the show notes. And if you've already read it, please take a minute to rate and review. And also consider purchasing it again for a friend or family member as a gift. Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 118 of Everyday Buddhism, Making Every Day Better. A quick note before we start the episode. Don't forget to listen to after the podcast conversation. Please hang around, listen to after the podcast conversation for some new things happening over at the Everyday Buddhism Patreon, where more offerings are available to public Patreon members and all tiers of the Everyday Buddhism Patreon community. But now to the episode. It's a pleasure to share a conversation with Ani Lodro Palmo, an ordained Tibetan Buddhist nun and director of the Vajra Vidya Monastery in Crestone, Colorado, and a spiritual teacher and author with more than 3 decades of monastic experience. Ani has devoted her life to spiritual practice and shares her understanding of the Dharma as an author of the books All That Appears and Exists, the Buddha's teachings to awaken the heart and turn suffering into joy, and her most recent book, The End of Suffering, Finding Love, Self-Compassion, and Awakening in a Chaotic World. As a recognized teacher of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and meditation, Ani Lodro's insights are deeply rooted in the unbroken lineage of Buddhist wisdom through the Karma Kagyu lineage of the Venerable Khenchen Thrangu Rinpoche. Although Ani has decades of monastic experience within Tibetan Buddhism, she teaches how the frustrations and dissatisfaction of our everyday lives can be understood and transcended through wisdom and compassion. She writes and speaks in an accessible way with the gentle encouragement of a friend that is helpful to both new seekers and seasoned practitioners alike. Her teachings are available through retreats, online sessions, and publications. In our conversation, we talked about a wide range of things, including how we tend to misunderstand what suffering is, gurus and reincarnation as a part of Tibetan Buddhism, but not a necessary part, the Four Noble Truths as a path to awakening, and taking the mystique from karma, as Ani writes, quote, transforming it from an enigmatic doctrine into a practical guide for conscious existence rooted in intention and behavior, unquote. We talked about her teachings of the 7 simple truths to end suffering. And roughly they are: 1, thoughts are nothing. They are no things. 2, labels and thoughts create our reality. 3, when we look for our thoughts, they aren't there. And number 4, your beliefs are not truth. Number 5, dropping attachments is the fastest way to end suffering. 6, you can't focus on helping others and be miserable at the same time. And 7, you don't need your mind as much as you think. And we talked about so much more. I know you will enjoy Ani Lodro's easy and relatable style of teaching and conversation and be inspired by what she has to say. The conversation starts now. Hello, Ani. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Wendy, for inviting me. It's an honor, and I've been looking forward to really speaking with you.
That's great. Yeah, we did have a little back and forth in email, so we got to know each other a little bit, but that's not the same as talking. And that's
Right.
it's the wonderful world of being a podcaster is talking to people that you would love to talk to and would never have the opportunity to talk to. So
Right.
I feel very blessed always to talk to my guests. So let's start with, the typical sort of what about you? And so my first question to you is, can you take us on a journey from a girl from New Jersey ending up as a Tibetan Buddhist nun?
Yeah.
And I'm going to add another couple of offshoot questions to that and see if you could remember those. If not, ask me. And what did prompt you to take a big step to being a monastic? And did you go from a practitioner to a monastic, or did you just jump into the monastic like whole hog?
Mm.
Um, and the other question is, and feel free not to answer this if you don't want to, but I think it's a question I've heard a lot of people ask monastics, and I've had a couple on from the Thich Nhat Hanh
Yes.
from Plum Village, who left um, the monastic life to become an everyday sort of person. But do you ever have any regrets or wondering if you missed anything in life? I mean, we
Mhm.
all have done that at one time or another. Like, what if? So
Yeah.
there you go. It's
Yeah.
open.
Well, can I start at the end first with
Oh,
that,
yeah.
with the question to it?
Yes, you can start. Yeah, because it's the last one in your mind. Sure, go.
Okay. Um, I kind of did things a little bit in reverse, as contrasting to other monastics, where I came into the monastic life. I didn't start my spiritual journey until I was 35 years old. So in my 20s and, for about a good 15 to 20 years, I had a pretty wild life. I was like, you hear about Jersey girls and all this kind
Oh boy, this sounds fun.
and in some ways, I was that kind of cliche, where I was looking for all the kinds of explorations in life that would be thrilling, right? So I did all the things that, were really actually, I feel now when I look back, I'm very happy I lived the way I lived because I got all of those kind of desires, human desires, sexual desires, emotion, all of those things. I played all that out for about 15 years. And at the end of that 15 years, I was not really very happy. And I just thought, wow, like I'm pursuing these things that society has told me, I should pursue. And here I am, and I really feel empty inside. So I think, in that way, I've heard a lot of people speak to me that, I'm a counselor. And a lot of people I work with come and say, I've done all these things. I've created this wealth for myself. I have this house and cars and blah, blah, blah. But I feel empty. I don't feel that my life is joyful for me. I don't feel joy in my life. And
Yeah.
that was me. I had pretty much I'm from Italian descent. My grandparents were all, I came to Ellis Island
Yeah.
from Italy. So we had, Italians can be kind of tribal, I would call them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I had a pretty kind of healthy upbringing in terms of, Italians tend to be raised by a village a little bit. Your cousins, and you have tons of cousins and aunts and uncles, and they're always coming over your house, and you're always going over their house. So you're raised in kind of an atmosphere where you're subjected to a lot of different personalities, and you get a good sense, environmentally of family. And there's a lot of really deep ties. And that way, I was I was kind of moving along in a pretty lucky, healthy way. And then, I write this as a very short essay in my book, but it was really a very kind of difficult part of my journey where I went to college, came out of college, um, and got engaged. I moved to California, had, fell in love in college sweetheart, that whole story. And then I was out in California, in LA, for about 2 years. Um, our house got broken into. My fiance was killed. He was shot and killed. And, it was such for me, um, we talk about like events that pull the rug out from under you, but it was kind of, you know, even more than I could even describe in terms of how devastated I was, because I was so, conditioned to think, here's going to be my life. I'm going to marry this person, have this house, and have these, and all of those things that were kind of delusional, if you think about it. We're kind of handed this, here's the life you should have, and then we take that on and say, okay, let me go create this. And that didn't happen. And so at the age of 24, or 24, 25, I lost the uncle that had been living with us. I lost my mom and I lost my fiance. So I had somewhat of an emotional mental breakdown. Right.
Somewhat, I imagine it's more than somewhat. Yeah. That would be
Yeah.
a lot for anybody, especially at that age. I can't even imagine really.
Yeah, I was very young. I was a young
Mhm.
24-year-old. I didn't have the maturity. I didn't have the emotional maturity or the skills, the coping mechanisms to deal with grief and loss and change. So I played out, of course, there was, a certain kind of rebelliousness in me, that something had been taken away from me. And I wanted that thing back. I wanted my mom back. I wanted the life that I had decided was going to be my life. And that just wasn't going to happen. And in this kind of cycle of rebelliousness, I kind of railed against all the things that I had said, well, that's not really my thing. Like drugs isn't my thing and alcohol is not my thing. My thing is this, right? I was like more of a good girl kind of person. Um, so all that got reversed, and I went down these dead end roads, really. I did a lot of drugs, I drank a lot, I had all types of relationships, some of which were very, damaging. They weren't beneficial to me, to my emotional or spiritual or personal growth. So at the end of that whole cycle, I was, at the end of my 20s, and 20, 29, 30, 31, that whole time, things just seemed to keep falling apart. It was almost like, I had played out this kind of wild life, and at the end of it, I had nothing to show for it in terms of, being a better person for it. I was not a better person for it. And I had ended up alienating friends, family. And so all this was coming into very clear view in my early 30s. I ended up trying to fix things through getting married to a friend, which was a bad idea. I've learned we should not marry our friends. And so that didn't really last long. So, at 34, I had a broken marriage. I had alienated myself from my family. I was somewhat alcohol and drug addicted. I had a lot of things going on that were worrisome. It was kind of like, when you go into AA and you're at the bottom of the,
Yeah.
you bottom out basically. That was me. And it was at that point that I just said, I had this insight, and the insight was basically, this is not the life I want to have. I have done a lot, it was like, instead of blaming outside of myself, which I normally did, for a moment, I looked inside and said, okay, there's something going on with me. It's not anybody's fault. It's not my ex-husband's fault. It's not my family's fault. I have to look at this for myself. And then
Well,
I,
that's a great level of maturity to hit, to
yeah,
come to that realization when you were at the bottom. But maybe if you were in AA, maybe that helped trigger that understanding. I don't know, but I'm kind of amazed that you did that after all of that.
yeah. Well, when I kind of hit bottom, I mean, people told me, they said, you should go to AA. You should go
Yeah.
to Narcotics Anonymous, Alcohol Anonymous. You need to do these things. And I listened. I actually, because when you bottom out, it's a very interesting experience because, there's nothing, there's no hope in a certain way.
Yeah.
You've kind of like the hope has evaporated in a certain kind of way. And you're not really interested in the things that were actually got you to where you are. Um, so you're kind of like at a loss. You feel lost.
Hmm.
And so I started with AA. And one of the things that was very clear when I started AA is that we need to be accountable, right? We need to be responsible.
Right.
We create our own life type of thing. And that was what helped me have that insight. Um, so it kind of, hopefully I'm not talking too much, but that's how I ended up.
No, no. Well, that's actually, I think that's excellent. People need to understand. I think people want to, they don't need to, but they want to understand because I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people that I've met over my years in Buddhism, both in Tibetan Buddhism, mostly in Tibetan Buddhism, were but also in the tradition I was inducted as a minister in, is a lot of people like kind of like, oh, I wish I could just like go to a monastery and just get out of this rat race. It's kind of like that kind
Yeah,
of escape thing. Um, and clearly yours was not. You were pushing yourself towards the positive rather than escaping, because the escaping is much more of the behavior you had before, or the behavior many of us have about looking outside, right? Okay, because
right,
I'm a mess now, but if I went to a monastery, I'd be okay, right? Everything would
right.
be all right. So it wasn't that. And that's, I think, a great insight into, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was around that same time that I also enlisted a therapist. And that, therapy, I tell people all the time, and I share my story of, my journey with my therapist, because Buddhism, this is kind of an aside. I don't know if you want to edit this out, but um, Tibetan Buddhism does not deal with Western society's mental, emotional struggles. In terms of our level of collective self-esteem, our level of self-criticism, the attitudes that are conditioned into us through our society, Tibetan Buddhism is not equipped to deal with Western views,
Yeah.
and so for me, because I had 3 years, 3 or 4 years of therapy with one person. I was seeing her a few times a week at one point, and she was very clear and very able to walk with me through that path of all the things that I had done that were emotionally painful and had left scars in me, and find my way out of that through accountability, basically.
Which is similar to the Dharma path of practice of intention and
Yeah,
and commitment and gratitude and devotion and all the things that we emphasize in walking the path of Dharma. And I'll touch on it. Reminded me what you said about Tibetan Buddhism isn't set up to deal with all our Western issues. And I remember the Lama saying, you know, with Americans, we don't ever see this in Tibet. All of you have such a problem with self-esteem and self-loathing that it actually is very narcissistic, really. And I
yes,
remember them saying that, and that stuck in my
yeah,
head. And I remember a lot of people, it was on a retreat that I remember one saying this, and it seemed like all the people who were on the retreat were kind of insulted by it. But
yeah.
you know, it was sort of accusatory, but I got it, man. And it's like then when I started studying Japanese Mahayana Buddhism, Zen and Shin, and I studied Eastern therapy, like Eastern psychology, like
Yeah.
Morita therapy and stuff. I'm not sure if you know that, like Nikon and those sort of practices,
Mhm.
um, which are mostly studied within Japanese Mahayana traditions, but they don't do Western psychology, but they get you into a much better place
Mhm.
because they don't do Western psychology. They,
Right.
you know, it's much more about using sort of the Dharma principles are all there, you know. So I get that totally. I mean, and I'm so glad you brought up psychotherapy because so many people think that somehow Buddhism's going to, if you got some junk you got to take care of, that somehow it's all going to go away when you start studying Buddhism. Well,
Mhm.
that is not true. And
No.
it can get you into a lot of trouble. I mean, there's been a few instances of Buddhist teachers that ended up in a real bad place, some of them dead, because they kept avoiding the therapy and the help that they needed for drug addiction or bipolar or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do emphasize it. I went through it, and I'm not going to go in there, but I went through trauma. Uh, I found out that I was diagnosed with chronic PTSD,
Uh-huh.
or complex PTSD, which I did not know I had.
Mhm.
And it came to the fore during the pandemic. And I think a lot of people had issues that
Mhm.
sort of surfaced during that time because it was a struggle for our s- our way we look at the world, even though I knew that things were
Mhm.
change was part of the deal and impermanence was part of the deal, and but you may know that and you may practice it, but when it hits on a global scale like that, it can upset your world. So yeah, and I immediately got therapy, and it did help me quite a bit. So I'm glad you emphasized that. That's very good. So
Yeah.
did you we get to where you became a monastic or
We're just at that turning point.
okay, why don't you take us along the journey? Because
Okay.
I tend to get off the track
Yeah,
sometimes. So
I do the same thing. Yeah, so I it was at that point after a few years in therapy, AA, and my therapist had started recommending books, Codependent No More. Many of the books that are now classics, The Road Less Traveled, The Art of Loving, Eric Fromm,
right.
Carl Jung. And there was a spiritual thread running through many of those books. And then
Gotcha.
I became interested in spirituality, and that's how I became. I want to know more about this. This is what I'm interested in. And so I ended up moving to California, and I started working with different teachers. I was working with one teacher pretty closely who was more of a yogini. She was a Hindu practitioner, and I was working with others as well. The one that I was working with closely, she asked to be kept kind of anonymous, so I don't really
Hmm.
spread her name. But I was also working with like Muji in Portugal, Ganglaji, a lot of the big names that we know, and where you
Yeah.
kind of like, well, who's the teacher? And you go, and these are the ones that are kind of on the circuit, I guess.
Oh, definitely. It's in a lot of people's spiritual history, I think, chronology. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was working with multiple teachers, and kind of more on the Hindu side, Advaita, no self, dissolution of the ego. And I was very committed, and I was very committed to selfless service. I understood in some, there must have been some innate part of me that understood very well if I wanted to, accumulate merit, that was going to be through karma yoga. It was going to be through selfless service. It was going to be through caring about other people so I could get my attention kind of out of the narcissistic
Right.
world I was kind of that I was kind of in.
Yeah.
So that went on for 10, 20 years. I was with one, my close teacher, I was with her for 19 years. I actually lived with her. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I stayed in service and we did community service. We did a lot of meditation. I would be considered in Hindu tradition, I would be considered kind of a bhakti, a
Bhakti,
devotional
sure.
student.
Yeah, bhakti yoga. Yeah, it's like that's it is very appealing to people who
Yes.
have that selfless service impulse, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. The
Yeah. So
devotional aspect, which is pretty hard to nurture in Western personalities.
it is.
I think you either have it or you don't or something. I mean,
Yeah.
it is hard
Yeah.
to nurture because most people, you know, goodness forbid that they would even like uh go prostrate in front of a Buddha statue, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I'm dealing with a lot now in my teachings, because so much of my unfolding and kind of moving into states of happiness and joy and purifying these kinds of obscurations or negative emotions came through the bhakti practice and karma yoga practice. But in my teachings now, my students are Westerners,
Yeah,
and
of course.
they're more interested in the intellectual aspects of Buddhism, which tends to move into mind training, right? All these things that we're,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm kind of blending that with the paramitas.
Yeah, you sneak them in whenever you can, right? I totally get that. It's because like I always tell my coming to Buddhism story is I came to it because of I call it the mental bling.
Mm,
I love Tibetan Buddhism for all the systems and the philosophy because I was a philosophy major. So it was like it was just I was just so attracted to the mental bling. But when I left Tibetan Buddhism, although I never feel it left me, I it's still way part of me. Um, I left it and went to the Japanese Mahayana,
mm,
and the Shin in this it was Shin and Zen, and the Shin path is so self-effacing and no, it's not mental and don't even go there. Don't even, we're not about that. And it's like, even though they are kind of, there's a lot of systems behind it. It was like, that took me so long to train that. And that is so graspy, you know.
mhm.
The intellectual pursuit part is so graspy. And it was like when I was studying through my ministry training, it was like it was very hard for me to give that give that up and become empty, become a foolish being, which is what they call it
Mhm.
Shin Buddhism is like a foolish being.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a very different thing working with Western students because I am one.
Yeah.
Is that
Mhm.
there's nothing in our culture that turns you that way unless
Mhm.
you go to maybe social work or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of our sangha, members of our kind of Buddhist congregation for our monastery, and then my own sangha that come to my teachings and retreats, many of them are counselors, therapists,
Yeah,
teachers. They
yeah.
tend to gravitate towards those vocations because those vocations are very fulfilling and enriching on a personal level. Yeah, so I find that to be true. And so many times when I'm doing teachings, I'm not only doing teaching as like I'm the teacher, I'm doing teachings as like in every single role we have, in our vocations, we are all actually teachers. We're all role models. How we're showing up is really speaks more than what we're preaching to people. So
Yeah,
that's
the showing, yeah, I'm glad you used the phrase showing up. I think it is all about showing up actually. And when we became ministers in our tradition, our teacher our mission that he gave us. He gave us a mission statement, and it was your job is not to be teachers, but to become better students.
Right.
And that's it. I mean, that really is it. And I had a Lama once tell me that it's like, um, be careful, everyone's a Buddha. It's the same. It's
That's true.
the same concept. But we're keep interrupting your chronology. We're right at the time I think you're
Good.
about to enter the monastery, right?
Yeah. So about, after about 19 years in Hindu practice, and I was reading mystical Christianity, I was so interested. It was kind of like I was a fish in water now. This
Hmm.
was kind of like I had found home in a certain way,
Yep.
right, in my heart. So at that point, there were a couple of transitions. The teacher I had been working with kind of was closing her ashram. Things were changing, and I was going through so much transformation myself. It was kind of the transformational. I think a lot of us as students and practitioners, we're hearing about this thing called emptiness and these states of consciousness. And for years, we're like, that's not happening to me. When is this thing going to happen? Maybe it will never happen. And then actually, it does start to happen. You do start to find yourself happy, joyful, but not because of anything that's going on outside of you. There's an innate
Right.
joy that's arising. And that was happening to me. And so I just could see that it was time for transition. My teacher was kind of not teaching, you know, anymore. And so I'll make this a very short story, but I had a dream of the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama said to me in the dream, come to this monastery in Crestone, Colorado. I didn't even know Crestone was on the map. And he showed me some kind of, signs that I would be in the right place. And he's told me that when to do it, the timing to do it. And this really happened. And so I had this dream, and it was so real. It was so, physically felt in my being, emotionally felt in my being. So I listened to the dream. I followed the dream. I took a flight to Colorado. I drove down to Crestone. I found the monastery he was talking about in the dream. And it was almost like coming to this monastery, Vajra Vidya in Crestone, was a coming home in a way I had never experienced before. It was like, I know this tradition. I know these people. I know the head of this lineage, Rinpoche, Thrangu Rinpoche. And there was such kind of a visceral experience. And I had planned, okay, I'm going to listen to this dream. Maybe it's, some delusion, some delusion that's happening with me. So I'll give it a couple of weeks, and then I'll go somewhere else and I'll find something else. But I never left. I ended up being here. Within like a month, I was asked to become staff, and then I was asked to become kitchen manager. Then I was asked to build a house for the llamas. Then I was asked to um, complete a wing that would complete the full construction of our monastery. And then I was asked to become the director for the monastery itself.
Well, did you ordain as a nun right away, or were you there as a practitioner for a while?
I started as a practitioner for a few years.
Okay.
And so about 6 years ago, I ordained. But because of my Hindu background, when I came here, um, the, this is a more difficult thing, I think, for even me to process now, but I was almost treated like a Tibetan. Maybe because so much had happened in that 19 years, so much purification, and I was just showing up as, in service with a certain level of bhakti attitude, and those kinds of things are very Tibetan.
Oh,
Uh,
they are. Yeah, they
yeah,
are. They are.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was treated as a Tibetan. And that I think led me to understand and really have self-confidence, have the confidence in, okay, there's something more going on here. There's been past lives with this tradition, with these teachers, and I just trusted that. So everything that unfolded was just a matter of me saying yes to what was being offered to me.
Wow. That's quite the story. It's quite, I mean, really, quite the story. Yeah, we'll explore your new book in detail, but let's start talking about Buddhism, the Dharma,
Of
Tibetan
course.
Buddhism. One of the things, let's jump into the deep end here right away. Sorry to do that to you,
No,
but let's talk about what I refer to as in my podcast as the bad news of Buddhism or suffering. Um, both of your books contain the word suffering in either the title or the subtitle, and
yeah.
rightly so, because the Buddha said, I come here to teach only one thing, suffering and the end of suffering.
That's
And that certainly is the bad news of Buddhism. I tend to believe people, though, don't think in life, as a student of people, as you get to be when you do this sort of thing, is, as you know, you probably have that too. Most people, honestly, in our culture, don't think they're suffering because they don't look at it from, like we've been talking about, from inside out. They look at it from outside in. They
yeah.
just, so unless they're dealing with some major illness or injury or trauma or some profound loss or grief, they honestly, I think, this is my opinion, okay, but I honestly think most Americans, or maybe Westerners, but definitely Americans, um, think they're just dealing with life, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of in that sort of life sucks and then you die kind of way, that cynical.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I see with people. And I think much of the problem, of course, it's discussed all the time. It's from what I consider and what most people consider the mistranslation of dukkha.
Yes.
The Sanskrit dukkha is
Yeah.
translated typically as suffering, which it's not at all really like that. It's way more nuanced. Um, it's- so, as a brief overview of your teaching insights, um, how how would you, and I want it to be like if you were going to create the tagline for your teaching
Mhm.
style, right? You know how there's like a
Mhm.
tagline on everybody's marketing statement. If you're going to take the tagline, how do you see suffering? How do you teach suffering, and how do you teach the getting rid of suffering or transcending
Yeah.
suffering?
That is at the core of my teaching, actually, what you just spoke and your questions. So, you know, there's many different ways we can explore this, and I could speak about it. The way I would start is to say that in the awakened state, there's an arising of joy. And that joy becomes established so that no matter what's going on around us, we have an innate, inherent experience of feeling safe, feeling what I call love. And that
Yeah.
love never leaves us. Now, I would contrast that with Western culture, which is a pursuit of desires, which I
Yeah.
believe at the core of these desires is the deep need to experience love and feel loved. So if we were going to go just like cut to the chase, we as a humanity want love. We want to feel love. We want to feel the experience of love. And the experience of love is the experience of connectedness, interconnectedness, connectedness with others. I think Thich Nhat Hanh phrased or created the word interconnectedness in a way,
Interbeing.
interbeing, that's right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, yeah, that's okay.
Interbeing as a way to kind of characterize or give a better understanding of how isolated we really do feel,
Right.
which we are not even aware of, right? Our the way that we live, where we have this belief system that we are all separate and individuals and independent, and we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to, you know, fend for ourselves. I would say that's a Western attitude. Okay. Buddhism teaches that that is a misconception of a greater truth, right? And the greater truth is we are interbeings, we are all interconnected, that we do not have to treat ourselves in such a harsh way so that we can cope with life. And kind of coming back to your point, which is, the Western view might say, well, I'm not suffering. And Buddhism is kind of a downer because like it's like they're saying, well, you're suffering, but I'm not suffering. And what Buddhism, I think, is saying really is we're numb to our own suffering. We are suffering, but we're numb to it. In the more awakened state, right, where we clear our obscurations and we're connected to our Buddha nature, in that state, we're sensitized to suffering. So if we're speaking with other people and they have a level of anxiety, of stress, of, separation, they feel isolated, they feel lonely. Even on subtle levels, in a more awakened state, we can feel that too, because we're empathic when we awaken. So we're no longer numb to suffering. And, of course, some people, this might trigger them to say, we as Westerners are numb to our own suffering. But that is actually, if we kind of go down the path of Buddhism or really any true tradition, we're going to need to uncover that for ourselves. How isolated do I feel? Do I feel unloved? Do I have self-love? Do I love myself? Do I have confidence in who I am as a being and my entitlement to shine my light here in the world? Most people would say no. I don't. Most people dim their light instead of shining their light. That's a pointer to a level of suffering in my characterization of what suffering is.
Yeah, I like that. And my last podcast guest, Henry Shookman, is a Zen master.
Mm.
Um, lovely, lovely, lovely guy. And he's in a tradition that's it's an interesting tradition because it's his lineage combines both Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen, and Soto
Uh,
is just sitting, or shikantaza, and Rinzai is the practice of koan study,
okay.
which is wonderful. I love koan study, and but the thing is his new book is called Original Love.
That's right.
Uh,
I know his book.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And it's a beautiful book, and it's kind of a book on meditation, but it's all based on that concept of original love. And so I asked him, what did you mean by original love, and what do you mean by love? Because
Uh,
that's kind of would be very a misunderstood word
yeah.
in in people who are used to reading Dharma books, it's like,
Yes.
but what you just said is exactly essentially what he described. It's what I and he said he used the term original love as a creative play on original face. Well, the Cohen,
Right.
what's your original face before your parents were born? But he
Right.
used original love, and I thought he when I first found out about this book, I thought he was doing a play on original sin. So instead of original sin, original love, which to
Right.
me was indicative of our innate perfection, our Buddha nature, and he said, well, it's that too, and because that's really what we're looking for, and that's what we arrive at when we start to get glimpses of awakening as we go through our practice. So just thought that was so interesting that that you said essentially the same thing he said.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll add to that too, because I haven't read that whole book, but I started reading it and I love it. And it was so close to kind of how I feel also and my teachings. I speak about love in my teachings quite a bit for a Tibetan Buddhist nun.
Well, yeah, it's in the book too. It's in the
Yeah.
book. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's wonderful because I think that's when you talk about like innate perfection, all things like that. That's it's still a little like conceptual and
Right.
heady, and it's nice to get to the point where you actually feel something because when you are like when he talks about when you're sitting in meditation and sometimes you like if you enter absorption or even if you don't, if you're just sitting in meditation, the feeling you feel is love. That's what you feel. And it just is just there. It's in you. It's like nobody gave it to you. It was just there. And I think that's a very wonderful way to approach Westerners or Americans on
Yeah.
that concept. So that I was very happy to see that. Yeah, it's the like you said, nobody wants to say they're suffering. I refer to, and you refer to it in your book too, the three sufferings,
Yeah.
so typical uh, Tibetan Buddhism, or it wasn't Tibetan. It actually came from the original Pali. But it's the three sufferings. It's like not only are we suffering, we classify it. Boy, it's like we have like the suffering, the suffering of change, and the suffering of conditioned existence. And you call it ordinary, change related, and pervasive, which I liked. Um, and they represent the different facets that we go through as walking around human beings when they're that have this overall sense of dissatisfaction and unease. But I think that definitely touches on this nuanced view of suffering from a Buddhist perspective, right? And so you didn't complete your tagline. How do you transcend the suffering?
How do we transcend suffering?
I mean,
Self-awareness.
we can
Yeah.
go in deeper when we get into the book, but that just a
Yeah.
sense of it
Yeah.
is good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, traditional Buddhism would speak to this by saying we transcend suffering by first becoming aware that we're suffering, and then looking inside to say, is this true? Am I suffering? Right? If we let's look at just Western cultures, not even Eastern Asian cultures, but in Western culture, if we turn on the radio, right? Is every song, almost every single song we hear, the number one genre in Amazon books is romantic novels, right? We are so
Unrequited love. Yes.
uh, it's everywhere. It's everywhere around us that we are in the pursuit of love. Well, we wouldn't be in the pursuit of love in the way we are if we already felt it, right?
Exactly.
So, of course, if we look at our culture and if we look at the contrasts between what we say and what we do, we can see that, wow, maybe the things that I want are causing me suffering. And that's the point. Are
Yeah.
my desires causing me to suffer? Do I have desires because I feel like I don't have what I need to be
Mhm.
happy? And that's, I think, the, the seeds of that, if we really explore it, will blossom into a more honest um, reflection, self-reflection of what's going on for us.
Yeah, just looking inside, which you know, I'm always hesitant to use the words like most or whatever, but most people in our culture don't spend 1 second pausing to see what's going on in the head. I mean, they just don't. They everything is a thing happens, react, a thing happens, react, a thing happens, react, right? So it's like just the looking inside is such a huge step. And it's the hardest step, I think, because once you start doing it, there's a little payoff, you feel better, right? So, but if it's very hard to for people to understand that you should do it and it's actually a good thing, and
Mhm.
because it's very uncomfortable at first. It's extremely uncomfortable. That's why nobody like that's why people always say I can't meditate. My mind is crazy. I can't stand to look at it. And it's like I get that. I mean, I meditate all the time and I have for many, 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 many years, but I still have those days, definitely, where it's like I feel like I'm going to jump out of my skin. So So it's like, why would you start doing that if it just feels crappy? But then there is a payoff if you keep doing it. What I think is the interesting point, and you touched on this a bit, in a couple ways. One from your original story, and one in what we're talking about now, is how many people a lot of people who come to Buddhism or spiritual practice in general, I mean, like your Hindu practice or whatever, is they come there because they are feeling awful. And they're trying to find a way out, or find a way to lessen the dissatisfaction and the trauma of life. And so to me, I've always thought that, in a sense, that is your innate perfection, your Buddha nature inherently guiding you to the right place, right? There, it's guiding. You actually had a dream from the Dalai Lama. Now, most of us can't say anything that dramatic, but we instinctively feel the pull towards something that will make us feel better. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with when I was teaching at the Tibetan Center, or now people who write to me from the podcast, is they come to it because somebody died, or they had a big horrible breakup, or they lost their job, or things that they just can't deal with it. So um, this is, remember when I said I call the bad news of Buddhism suffering, and I come to teach suffering? Well, the good news of Buddhism is that instead of original sin, we have original goodness, and that is pushing us to have the answer. What are your thoughts?
I would completely agree with that. I mean, it's our innate Buddha nature that is always trying to, in my view, always trying to arise, always trying to guide us. And we're doing all these other things that get in the way of that, right? Which is called obscurations. And if we hear the Buddha's, we read sutra, the Buddha and other masters, Padmasambhava, all these great masters we hear about, what they talk about is the only thing separating sentient beings from Buddha is obscurations. And these obscurations are thoughts, basically.
Hmm.
We move our, which is why there's such an emphasis on this kind of non-thought, no self. Because the idea is, if we can clear the mind, this personal subjective mind with all its desires and attachments and needs and inaccurate belief systems, if we can clear that out of the way, well, then there's no separation between us and our Buddha nature, and we are Buddhas, right?
That's perfect. And there is that tugging, but nobody's ever quiet enough to hear it or feel it or whatever the thing is. Um, as a follow-up, I have a couple of questions, and I think many of my listeners want me to ask this of you because I know a little bit about demographics. Although in podcasting, it's almost impossible unless you're doing a very expensive marketing study or something. Um, and these were the things I had trouble with when I first came to Tibetan Buddhism. Um, Number one is gurus, okay?
Yeah.
And this is tied into looking to ourselves. So if we have Buddha nature, doesn't a dependence on a guru, whether it's a guru that's alive or dead, or in nirvana, however you want to term it, um, isn't that almost like a subtle encouragement of grasping outside of ourselves? But I know what the lamas say, and this is very hard to explain, but they say no, the guru isn't outside of ourselves, and that's why we do Vajrayana visualization practice to bring the guru inside and then dissolve it and all of that stuff, which I always had a lot of problems with because I can't visualize for the life of me. But in the Buddha's death teaching, though, and this is something that I've asked a lot of teachers this. And sometimes it hangs them up, I have to say. In the Buddhist test teaching, which is the Mahaparinirvana Sutra or whatever, he answered Ananda's question. He was dying, Buddha's dying, Ananda's freaked out, and everybody wants to know who's going to teach now that the Buddha's gone. And so this is a quote from it. Um, Be islands unto yourselves, be a refuge unto yourself, and with no other refuge. Let the Dharma be your island, let the Dharma be your refuge, with no other refuge. And how does a monk or nun dwell as a light unto themselves, as a refuge unto themselves, with no other refuge, with the Dharma as their island, with the Dharma as their refuge, seeking no other refuge? And then the Buddha continued by saying that one dwells as a light unto oneself by contemplating the four foundations of mindfulness. That's where the four foundations of mindfulness, one of the ways that it's referred to, is not where it's introduced, but contemplating the body, which we've already talked about, the feelings, the mind, and mind objects. It is by paying close attention to our own inner life experience, we develop our inner wisdom or our light. So before I have my next question about Tibetan Buddhism, and this is where, you can push back anytime on these things. I can hear people asking these kind of questions. So if you could speak to that before I ask the next one, I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, Wendy, because that was beautiful and I loved listening to it. But what's the question in there?
Oh, the question was the beginning. Is like the beginning is, if we have Buddha nature, and if the Buddha's death sermon was, don't seek anything outside.
Right,
No, Ananda, we don't need anybody else. All you need is yourself.
right,
Why do we have gurus?
right. It's a great question. And I think it's a question that needs to be asked because one of the things that Buddha emphasized while he was alive was do not listen to me, do not listen to anybody. Look for yourself and find out what is true, right?
Right.
That was his very much
Right.
foundational teaching in Buddhism, which kind of flies in the face of this kind of guru principle, where
Yep.
we have this devotion to the guru. Now, there's a lot of different teachings around this, and there's a lot of different paths, and not all paths include a guru.
Right.
Right? So, the easy answer would be, well, if we have kind of an aversion or we don't, it doesn't resonate for us to have a guru, well, we don't need one. We can follow the Buddhist path without one.
Yeah.
Yet, in many of the sutra, you see this kind of, you know, understandable hierarchy where you have teachers and gurus that are supporting those that want to get to the place where they are at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in our culture, even we have the same kind of structure. If I want to learn how to paint, I'll go find someone that knows how to paint to teach me.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So in another way of looking at it, if we want to understand awakening, well, let's go find somebody that's awake and they can tell us how they got there. But that doesn't really speak to the problems people have with the guru principle. The problems people have with the guru principle is that I now am surrendering myself to this guru. I think that is the underlying issue because we, especially as Westerners, have this understanding, have this belief system that to be autonomous, right? We cannot give our power away to somebody else. Right?
Right.
If we have a guru, we are giving our power away to another person, right? I agree with that kind of distinction. But what I think we're missing there is the understanding that we are always giving our power away to all the belief systems and
Yeah,
all
to our own thoughts every minute, right?
exactly. So I think in some ways it's kind of, again, a misunderstanding, a misconception, a belief system that doesn't actually reflect our innate Buddha nature, right? Because we are always, as a culture, being, especially now with social media and all the things that are going on, where we're literally being brainwashed into belief systems that have nothing to do with our inner moral compass. And I think, maybe this is kind of going through a backdoor way of your question. You could tell me
No,
whether it is.
no, it's actually good. And when I think about this all the time, is what well, you mentioned social media. It's like in the last uh I don't know, 7 to 10 years, um all because of social media, it's all these Western gurus, quote unquote, have appeared.
Mm.
And with many of them with questionable or no lineage in any kind of way, and they just proclaim themselves somehow to gurus, and people follow them, and maybe follow them much to their dismay at the end. And in all cases, you have to be careful. Who are you listening to? Am I listening to my thoughts? Am I listening to some other belief system? Am I listening to, and that's why the Buddha's teaching was absolutely right on. I mean, it was try it out for yourself, and if it doesn't work, then don't do it, really. But unfortunately, because I think there's been a sort of a lack of spiritual practice, a lack of sort of belief in authority figures, and I don't, I get that you want to reject hierarchy. I get that. But then again, if we reject everything that even smells like
Mm.
that, then we open ourselves up. We're totally empty, and we open ourselves up to susceptibility to the consumer-based gurus, the transactional gurus, I call them, which is very hard. But I liked your take on it, and I just wanted to throw that out there because that's really it. I remember that the first time I went, when I was learning Vajrayana and getting in empowerments and doing all these things, I remember asking the center director, if we're supposed to see things as they really are, see life as it is, why in the heck are we inventing this whole visualization that has nothing to do with it? It's like, so that just goes to show you how, our thinking and layered onto that kind of practice can be very, what?
Yeah, it kind of, creates a lot of inner controversy. Like, I don't understand what I'm doing. And if it's supposed to look like this, why does it look like this? And if I'm supposed to do this on my own, who are all these deities? And why do I have to supplicate to them and depress? So there's a lot of analytical opportunity in Buddhism to work out these questions. I don't think Buddhism, or certainly my view, is that we're not allowed to ask these questions. We should be asking these questions. I think
Yeah.
that is why it's a wonderful linear unfolding to start with mind training, to look
Oh
at our
yeah.
mind first. Don't dive into deity yoga. Like, first work out unraveling all these belief systems that have nothing to do with our happiness, and they're just, you know, thrown on us, and we're burdened with these belief systems, and where our society is reflecting that these things are true, but we know inside that they're not true for us, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, mind training
absolutely.
is awesome, and it's like, but I think things have changed since when I first got into to there wasn't even internet then, it's like if I
Right.
wanted to I mean there wasn't. I'm when I first got into Buddhism, that wasn't even a possibility. So if you went to a center, or if you whatever, it's like it was like totally overwhelming, and sometimes it was just a bunch of uh Vajrayana practices, or beginning Vajrayana practices that you could get empowerments without Nundro and stuff. It's like that is so confusing for people, and it's like I don't think it serves anybody in this culture really, without a little mind training. It just
Right.
doesn't, it's but luckily today everything is open. right? There's no there's not this closing off. Oh, it's a secret practice, you know. It's like
Yeah.
there are some secret practices, but the point is that I'm so glad that that's not the way that is anymore. We're I'm sorry, I'm talking too much about this. So the other question is about reincarnation and tulkus. Okay, I understand the concept of tulkus, and I think most of the people who are listening to me have heard the word before, but if it's not, it's people who are recognized as high enlightened masters, reincarnated, and sometimes they recognize them as little babies, and it's kind of like the whole Dalai Lama thing, and I understand now today that maybe under some scrutiny to change things a little, make it more contemporary. I think the Dalai Lama even hinted at that about his passing, but I don't think it's going to happen. But hey, whatever. So it seems like having a belief, at least in reincarnation, if not Tulkus, just the reincarnation bit, is a big part of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. And maybe I could call that organizational think. But because if you get involved in a center, it's like almost accepted. And then if you don't accept it, you feel like, well, where do I sink my teeth in here? So I was and am agnostic about reincarnation per se. Um, I do have the mind stream thing. I get that, and I think that's kind of where it goes. But and had and still have great respect for my all my teachers and lamas and everybody I learned from in my years with Galup and Kagyu practice. Which build a deep foundation of Buddhist philosophy that I absolutely cherish. But when I share through writing or or teaching presentations, and I noticed you do this too in your book, as I try to rephrase things to make it more accessible for people, especially secular types, practitioners who tend to, when they hit something like that, like they throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, and it's so sad to me. And then it becomes this McMindfulness. You've heard the term, right? No,
Yeah.
the McMindfulness sort of teaching, and it's all Buddhism taught in a filtered way, sort of like distilled water, where they emphasize mindfulness only, without even a reference to the four foundations of mindfulness or any sutras at all. So as something I'm sure you'll agree with, that I'm sad about this because I think it's important to have an unbroken lineage of teachers. I think it's important. I think it's also important, despite what I said about gurus, I think it's important to have devotion. I mean, it's just important. Like if you don't have devotion, first of all, if you don't have some faith in that this, like you said, if that this person's going to help you by teaching you this, then you wouldn't do it at all. So if you do it and then it works, then you need to have a little devotion for it. So um sorry for the long intro, but your thoughts on that? The similar, right, to what I just said?
Yeah, and I'm going to say something that may make me unpopular with some Tibetan Buddhists, but I do not believe that we have to believe in reincarnation to benefit from Buddhist teachings. And I feel very strongly about that. We don't have to dive into the cosmology of Tibetan Buddhism. We don't have to understand about all the Buddha realms. None of that is necessary to exit suffering, in my view. Okay. And I think that's very, it may sound like a strong position coming from, a Tibetan Buddhist nun, but the reason I say it is because in our Western culture, I believe we need a basic foundation, and that basic foundation is going to benefit us so much that to think about, like, do I need to believe in reincarnation? It's just not necessary at the level that we are at right now as a culture, where we are, our planet's on fire. We're still killing each other. I mean, you don't need to believe in reincarnation to decide you don't want to kill people, right?
Oh, right. Or you don't need to believe in the hell realms if we're living in them right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And many aspects or many portions of the planet are. I think it's also important to remember that when, Buddha arose from sitting under the Bodhi tree enlightened, what he taught was the Four Noble Truths. He didn't teach cosmology, he didn't teach,
Right.
he said, here's what suffering is. Your mind and your thoughts are creating stress, anxiety, pressure on you. That is a form of suffering. There's a way to stop suffering. There's a path to stop suffering. And that was it.
That exactly. It's the first turning of the wheel is the whole point. I think if you teach nothing else, that's it. That's all you need. You
Yeah.
just have, but people have to practice it. But by reflection and good intention and all those things. But I think you're right, and good on you for taking a stance as a Buddhist nun.
I do have, I have opinion. I'm a Westerner. I understand
Yeah, I know, and I know from reading your book that you have a deeper devotion that goes beyond that, but you are aware and understanding and sympathetic, and you're trying to help people in a way by speaking to them in the language in which they can hear it. That's right, because if you're not hearing it, it ain't gonna work, right?
yeah. Yeah, but I
So.
didn't start out as, this very deep devotional practitioner. I started out as a mess, and then went to therapy. And therapy, if when you look at therapeutic modalities, a lot of what they're teaching is resonates with the Four Noble Truths. What is it that is going on in our mind, and how are we processing that? And is there even any space between us and our own thoughts to realize, hey, these thoughts are not even who I am. It's a thought. It's
It's a
not.
thought. Yeah, I had one of my podcast guests who was Buddhist a Buddhist psychotherapist, and that was her actual degree from the Buddhist University in, was it Colorado? Where is that? I
Oh,
forgot the name.
Naropa.
Yeah, Naropa. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and wonderful person. And she said we make thoughts our gods. I loved that. That's it. We think if we think it, we must believe it, and we must behave accordingly, right? And
exactly.
that's where we
I
get
think
in the.
that's really that's what I think that is what gets us in trouble. We have a thought, it's telling us to do something, and then we do the thing the thought is telling us. Most of the time, these thoughts aren't even our own.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I always say to my Sangha, it's like when I sit and think about, look at my thoughts in meditation, uh, half of them, if not 90% of them are bullshit. I mean, pardon my French, but they're not even true. It's like, exactly. So it's like, why? Gosh, thank God I don't react to them as much anymore. Not that I don't, I do sometimes, but at least I know to, as Suzuki Roshi said, is like let it in the front door and then open the back door and let it out, right? So
That's a beautiful way.
but don't invite it for a cup of tea.
Exactly. As soon as we put our attention on it, start fueling it, making a story, this is what happened to me. All
That's
this,
right. Oh, poor
then
me.
yeah, then it goes south from there. We get,
Yeah.
we're spinning around in some kind of mind world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It is like a complete fantasy. Okay, there are 16 chapters in your book, The End of Suffering, Finding Love, Self-Compassion, and Awakening in a Chaotic World. These 16 chapters illustrate key points of reflection and understanding of Buddhist teachings, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist practice. Um, I'll rattle off a list of some of my favorites, and I've shared those with you. But I want you to elaborate on whichever ones you want to elaborate on. Any ones that you feel like I got to just jump in here. I got to do this. But I thought I'd share with you the ones that really I loved because you start each one with a parable or a sutra story, or some of them it's just parables like pretty much obvious in Western culture. So they're not like out there. They're not all sutras. Um, so it's like the Velveteen Rabbit and so forth. Everybody knows what you're talking about there, but so I'm going to list my favorites just to say, at a girl, I love those. So here they are. The selfish giant parable as a teaching of how attachment to untrue beliefs comes from our conceptual thinking. Love that. The burning house. I think people have heard this parable and heard the typical teaching gone that are related to it, but it's still a good one. Burning house parable and the three poisons of delusion, desire, and anger or hatred. The Four Noble Truths is the path of awakening. Well, we already touched on that. But I love, 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 love your presentation on karma. And I'll
Yeah.
even quote you. You wrote, quote, transforming karma from an enigmatic doctrine into a practical guide for conscious existence. What a wonderful sentence. And emphasizing self-awareness and responsibility, quote, rooted in intention and behavior, unquote, and using reflection and self-inquiry as tools. I always say when I teach, it's there, everybody knows that part of the meditation practice is awareness. We're trying to open our awareness to things outside of us, to things inside of us, but mostly things inside of us, but also outside because it tunes our capability of awareness to make, and also breaks down our skin boundaries to feel like we're part of everything, right? Um, but anyway, if with if you have awareness without intention or intention without awareness, and that's the main thing, which a lot of people say, I intend to, and then
Mhm.
they don't do the awareness or the practice, then it's only a wish and it won't work. So I love that you emphasize that. The other one, mustard seed parable. I think everybody knows that one who's been around Buddhism for more than a minute, and how it highlights how we continue to deny the reality of change and impermanence. And I think the pandemic was a wonderful illustration of how people totally have denied that, and they were caught unaware and uh, lost their universal minds. The paramitas and your personal story of tragedy and mental suffering, which you shared earlier, so we at least got that. But you tied it to the paramitas as your way out. Bodhicitta through the filters. This is what I love this through the filters of Carl Rogers and Carl Jung. So that's a pretty good way to introduce bodhicitta. Um, Fear of death, terror management theory, contemplation on death, and a Buddhist view. And then the Velveteen Rabbit, as I talked about before, which kind of illustrates how to be authentic. And I love that you tagged on aging there because
Mhm.
subject near and dear to my heart at 71.
Mhm.
um, Seven simple truths to master our minds. That's sort of your wrap up. Do these things. This is the prescription. I'll give you the RX. You do these things. Things will be cool after that. And then the practice of nothing wrong. So Ani, you jump in where you want to jump in. I'm just
Okay.
sharing what I loved.
Yeah, thank you. That was really a beautiful synopsis, actually. Um, let's start with karma, because that is something I think that's dear to your heart, that's dear to my heart. It's something that I don't think it's almost synonymous with Buddhism. And, there's certain things that you hear about in Buddhism, suffering and karma are the two labels that we get very familiar with early on if we're secular Buddhists also. I want to say about karma that some people believe that to understand karma, we have to believe in reincarnation. I do not advocate that at all. And the word karma means action, right? Just by understanding what the word is, it kind of alleviates a lot of what might be misperceptions about it, right? And in my book, I say we shape our lives through karmic imprints and patterns and behavior.
Yeah.
That's really the essence that we're pointing to when we talk about karma, that how we create our lives, the actions, the decisions, the choices we make create imprints, right? And also reinforce patterns. If we do something again and again and again, and it becomes really familiar, it's just almost autopilot to continue to do it. And
Yeah.
these are kind of the signposts where karma is allowing us to reflect, or contemplation of karma is allowing us to reflect on our behavior and ask ourselves, is this behavior really supporting my happiness, where I want to be, how I want to grow? And that's, I think, the deeper teachings of karma. It's like an opportunity to look at what our actions are. Are these actions even mixed with awareness? Am I even aware of the way I react? Many times when I'm counseling people and they're describing an event in their lives, and sometimes you kind of read between the lines when you're counseling people, and they're telling me how they responded. I know that the way they responded was met very differently by the other people in the circumstances than
Oh, yeah.
yeah. And we are so blind to how we are perceived by other people.
But we're
Particularly,
not blind to how other people are reacting. We see
yeah,
theirs great. We just don't
yes.
see our own.
We don't see our own. And it all goes through a filter, which is biased. And so then we have this, we magnify other people's reactions, which might be quite neutral, right? And then we kind of, water down our own reaction. So all of this kind of stuff is going on. And this is all reflective of karma. Because if in karma, we really want to be honest and see, again, we're talking about seeing how things really are. Well, we're also talking about seeing how we really are.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
I think karma is a very, very beautiful, reflective practice, and it's cause and effect. It means if we do this, there's a likelihood that there's going to be some type of consequence that might look like this. And taken very simply at face value, instead of adding a whole bunch of mystical stuff on top of it, is
Yeah, dissing the woo-woo and getting right?
yeah,
Exactly. Well, and also I think it's real important that you talked about how the perpetuation of it. It's the
yeah,
habit, like the 12 links, which we won't go into,
right.
but that even if you don't believe in that in a mystical or esoteric sort of way, it makes perfect sense to me. I say the perfect illustration of it is if you're walking through a meadow and there's a path where all the grass is pushed down, you go there. You
Yeah.
don't start your own path. So if you keep doing the same things over and over again, what is going to make you stop it unless you're intentional?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess one thing that makes us stop patterned behavior is that over time, the result of that patterned behavior is repeats itself. Just like our patterns repeat itself, the results repeat itself. So we continue to get the result we don't want. And at some point, I think we have to look at, well, okay, maybe it's not outside of me or just bad luck or maybe it's something I am doing that is creating this result that I do not want to have. And that is an exact way to define karma.
Yeah, or as Einstein said, insanity.
It
If you
is.
keep doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Buddhist teachers have described humanity as insane.
It is insane. Yeah, and like I always say too, is like, oh, sorry about that. I'm having a klesha attack because, well, it's an obscure, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm just in the midst of one of my klesha attacks. This is not, wouldn't be my normal response if I had thought about it a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Which kind of also points to, if we do, I know there's other points we want to get to, but just to say this also about karma, if we are able to see our behavior is not supporting us, then we can do pattern interrupts, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and that's so valuable, and it saves so much time from continuing to go down these dead end roads.
Time
Emotion.
and trouble, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So I think the other point about karma briefly is karma is not fixed. There's some kind of misconception that, your karma has, imprisoned you to have this type of destiny. I don't believe that at all. And that's not what Buddhism says. It says it's not fixed. You can change your karma quickly. So that's what.
Yeah, yeah. That's well, I do. There is. It's in like popular culture, karma is like one of the most misunderstood concepts. It's ridiculous, of how misunderstood it is. It like they think it like takes away your agency, and it's like, oh, this was meant to be, and all this stuff. And maybe it was. May I don't. But who says? I mean, only you say what really. So thank you for that teaching. Um, Other ones you'd like to chime in on?
One of my favorite is the parable of the burning house.
Okay, good.
I know that people know about this parable, and I know that it may be, somewhat kind of popularized in Buddhism. I find it to be deeply profound. And if you read the sutra, if you read the translation, the English translation, where Buddha is saying, um, you know, I am the father of the world. I am seeing the suffering. And he's kind of pointing to, you don't see it. You don't see your own suffering because all these distractions are going on. It's like we're children, right?
Hmm.
In another sutra, Buddhist describes our world, our humanity, as an adolescent generation, which I think is very useful to
Hmm.
consider and to reflect on. And he's not making a judgment, and Buddhism isn't really making a judgment about where we are in our spiritual growth. But what it is saying is that we are constantly distracted because we don't have mastery over our minds. We don't have a disciplined way of keeping our attention on the things that really do matter. And in another parable, which is the parable of the poisoned arrow, Buddha is basically is saying something connected to this, which is, the urgent matter at hand is what needs to be seen. What is the urgent matter at hand? The urgent matter at hand is that we don't understand our minds, that we listen to thoughts that are not true, that we follow thoughts that us into dangerous or hurtful or harmful or suffering situations. And then at the end of this whole thing, where we're spending a whole lifetime chasing after desires and distractions, we end up in a place where we're aging, sickness, and we're going to die. That's the urgent matter at hand. And we have no idea of how to negotiate or maneuver through the stages of death.
Yeah.
That is really what he's talking about. And he's pointing to that also in the burning house very, very much. He says, you spend your life in distractions. Well, then the end comes, which you're not prepared for. All right. And because you're not prepared for it, you're in total fear. And that is an intense amount of suffering. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very important to, I kind of wrote this note down. We have this idea that awakening, quieting the mind is going to be boring. Buddhism is boring. I have heard people tell me that to my face. I'm not going to read your book because Buddhism is boring. I've heard people say that. Um,
Wow, I've never thought of it that way, actually at all. But yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard that, and I've never thought of that because
yeah,
I
I
never
hadn't.
found it boring.
Yeah, I hadn't either, but people have actually said that to me. Meditation is, on and on.
Well,
Um,
meditation is boring. Yeah, I
yeah,
get
yeah.
that.
Well, a lot of people see Buddhism as meditation.
Good point. That's all they see. Yes,
That's
right.
all they
Okay.
say, which I think is partly, um, not to create blame, but partly because in secular Buddhism, we're trying to simplify things, but sometimes things get watered down. So the richness of the path sometimes can be lost. You kind of pointed to this earlier, and
Yeah, with mindfulness and like the distillation of the teachings, it loses all the heart of it, the feeling of it,
yeah,
the substance. Really, it just
right,
is like how I'm going to do this to be more productive. Like everybody's. It's been said a million times. You can use mindfulness, and the army does teach mindfulness to be better killers.
exactly,
So it's like,
yeah,
that's sort of, it's misappropriating the whole thing and it turns it into something completely different. And
yeah,
I'm not putting blame on it either because I understand the need for some sort of secularization to just attract people to the path.
of course. Yeah, and I agree with that. I think we need, I think secular Buddhism is benefiting humanity, benefiting Western culture. I think it can be taught in a way that other aspects that can deepen the path for people without complicating it is there's an opportunity for that.
Yeah.
So I would also, say that about it. I think getting back to the burning house parable, one of the things I really loved about this teaching is that it's a teaching that Buddha gives himself. And at the end, what he says is very interesting. And I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not going to read from the book or the sutra. But he says that we don't realize the level of joy that we will have when we become enlightened. We don't believe that something can be better than samsara, actually. And I think that's so profound because if we really look at why we're not on spiritual paths or why we're not committed to our spiritual path more, it's because there's a certain level of complacency or feeling like, well, samsara is okay. I'm having fun. There's a pleasure level of it. And what he's saying is there's so much more pleasure. There's so much more joy. There's so much more richness and love and all the things you really want in awakening, in enlightenment. And that point in that parable is really what totally moves me.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe for people because we touched on this earlier too. It's like unless you have to you have to go a little past the wading in, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, yeah. For any, people have asked me, "What's the payoff of Buddhist practice?" It was like, well, in a sense, there's not a payoff really. The practice is the payoff itself. You just keep practicing. But to hear something like that, that would be like saying, just go to the gym um, and just keep going to the gym. Without saying, you will develop a better musculature. There's the carrot isn't obvious, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate because it's because of the carrot that I became so committed to the path. For some reason, I had the sense that something wonderful would happen if I would stay on the path. And that something wonderful did happen. And I want everyone to understand that. So
Yeah, I think, well, it's like what I said at the beginning is like people don't think they're suffering. They don't understand that they're suffering. It's because they're living that sort of cynical path of, life sucks and then you die. And they really do believe that. I mean, they really do believe that. And it's like it's most people in our culture are not idealists.
no.
There was a time,
Yeah.
when I was growing up in the 50s, there was a lot more idealism around, idealism about, doing better than our parents, getting a good job, having a house, all that would be enough to make samsara a little bit attractive, right?
Mm.
But I think idealism has dried up completely. And so it's very hard to say you clearly were more idealistic than some, because most people just say, I just need, give me the Buddhist pill and I'll be all better, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And also, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and there was a lot of things going on in the 60s and 70s. I didn't participate in those things, like, the whole Woodstock era. I didn't participate in those things. But then I kind of decided, oh, maybe that was a good road to take. And so in my 20s is when I kind of explored all of those things that were being kind of marketed by this younger generation.
Yeah, I'm older than you by, I don't know, about 8 years or something. And it's like I did, I was a hippie. I grew up in that era.
Yeah,
I was like, I lived right near Kent State University. So I saw the shootings, and I protested the Vietnam War. I, I did drugs. I loved rock and roll. I mean, it was like all of that. And I did it at that perfect time when you were like 17, 18, 19,
yeah,
20. All right. But it is, and there was a certain amount of idealistic pursuit in that when you think about it, because you thought that if this, like protesting and stuff, that would get us somewhere. Well, not so much right now, right?
yeah.
So we won't get political, but okay, go back. Go to another one.
Yeah, I know we could get political. There's a lot we could probably each say about that.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, I think the other thing to say about, the parable of the burning house and that level of teaching is, the urgent matter at hand is really dealing with our mind, understanding how it processes, and creating some type of cessation of how the mind is driving us and controlling us. And again, we don't have to go anywhere in cosmology to look at the science of the mind, which is very, very much a foundational Buddhist teaching or
and
seek.
you actually teach that in the seven simple truths or whatever you called it. I mean
Yeah,
that,
Seven Simple Truths.
yeah, yeah, you actually that's you did boil down mind training very well, I thought, in that. Uh,
I kind of, the reason, like, do you want to move to that? Because
yeah,
maybe
let's, because I know it was one of your favorites, and that,
it is
yeah,
my favorite.
and it's one of mine too. So yeah, why don't we
Yeah.
move to that, and then because when we probably should wrap it up because I've like spent a lot of your time this afternoon. So
Well, thank you for doing that. It's a real joy. This is what I love talking about.
yeah, right. It's like, yeah, exactly. I'm just doing what I love to do anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I have somebody to talk to about it, um, at your level, which is, I only have wonderful feelings about that.
That's nice.
Yeah. The seven simple truths. So you want me to just say what they are?
Yeah, that's a good idea because
Briefly?
they're really they're simple to repeat. So
They're
go.
very simple to repeat, and then I can talk about why they're in the book and why I think they're important and why I teach them. I have a whole retreats around this.
That's
Um,
cool.
yeah. So the seven simple truths are: number one, thoughts are nothing. They
I
don't come
love it.
from anywhere and they don't go anywhere. They are no things at all. Number two, it is through our labels and our thoughts that we create our reality. Right. Number three, if we look for a thought, we actually can't find it. If
I
we
love that one. Yeah, that's perfect.
It's a Dzogchen teaching. If we look at our mind,
Yeah, it
disappear.
is a Dzogchen teach.
Yeah,
Exactly. It
yeah.
is.
Actually, all of these are Dzogchen.
Well, yes, pretty much. And or Advaita,
Yeah, Veda. Yeah.
the non-dual, the nature of mind teachings are they're in Zen. They're actually everywhere, but I was first um introduced to them through Dzogchen too. So
Yeah, that's how I was. Number four, belief systems are subjective. They are not truth. What we believe is only what we believe.
yeah,
That's it. That's as far as it goes.
and that doesn't make it any kind of magical formula in any kind of way. Yeah, just because it's
Right.
in your head.
Right. I mean, we tend to be very rigid about our positions because we identify with them, and then that speaks to who we think we are, which is a whole level of suffering.
Yeah.
Okay. Number five is if we drop our attachments, if we want to like boil down the whole spiritual path to one statement, is when we drop our attachments, we awaken,
Yeah.
which is pretty incredible, you know?
Yeah.
Yes.
Easier said than done, but yes.
Yes, easier said than done.
That
Absolutely.
very good in theory, in practice a little
Yes,
bit challenging.
very much, very much. It takes a lifetime to get there, but six is a statement about selfless service. We can't continue to be in our own misery when we're caring for, supporting, helping other people.
Right.
Taking our attention off ourselves and putting it on helping someone else is an incredibly quick way to alleviate anxiety, stress, suffering. And number seven is we don't need our mind as much as we think we do.
I love that. Just park it. You don't need it.
We we're like slaves to our mind. We think we need this, this constant kind of like influx of information. Stimulus is always coming in through our senses, and we're constantly processing it. And it's just become such a noisy machine.
Well, and now more than ever. I mean, it wasn't anywhere near like that when I was growing up or when I was in my 20s or 30s. Even when I first got into Buddhism, it wasn't like that because we didn't have these supercomputers that we walk around with every day, barraging us with information. And and because they know how to build the algorithms to make you addicted to the whole thing, you it's just it's amazing anyone can stick with Buddhist practice these days. Although I do hear that younger people are ditching their smartphones for dumb phones. So it's like, wow, that's amazing, awesome, because it's even hooked me to the point that like I told you at the beginning, I was attracted to Buddhism because of the mental bling. It was all that conceptual, wow, that's so cool. All these lists and this awesome. And it's like, and I used to read like all the time. I was always reading. I can't read as much anymore because everything is all boiled down to snippets, and scroll-worthy headlines, and it's like it got me in it, and it's so just amazing that any of us can weather this and get out. That so. These seven simple truths are awesome. They really are. They're awesome. I think I might post that in my show notes. Do you mind?
I take any part of the book. I know we have to do this copyright infringement thing, but I don't pay attention to any. I self-publish, so they're my copyrights, and you're welcome to
Yeah, me too. I
it.
self-published my book, and it's like, here, yeah, do what you want with it. But I think the seven simple truths will attract people in the show notes and get them to listen. So
Yeah,
I think it's a good tease because they're easy to do.
yeah.
So, Ani Lodro, what a wonderful conversation. I thank you
I
so
love
much
you,
for
Wendy. I have to just say, I'm all about love. I tell my students I love you, and
I
you're just
love you too.
amazing.
And there's so much more I'd love to talk to you about. and I know, like I said, I'll post links to the things. But before we close, is there anything you would like to close on, to like your most
Yeah.
your big thing you want to leave the audience with?
What I would want to leave the audience with is to please listen to podcasts like yours. We can do it
Well,
in
thanks
our
for the
car.
plug.
Yeah, but I truly feel that way. Like, I'm always thinking about how do we spread Buddha Dharma? Like, all these other things are being spread that are so, addictive and not helpful. And then, every once in a while, the way we promote Buddhism, I don't think we promote it enough. Well, there's not money in it like Mark Zuckerberg has in Meta, so that we could put millions of dollars into promoting ourselves the way he promotes the crap that he promotes. So
Right.
we're kind of like we're a little bit behind the eight ball, and I'm always thinking of ways that we can get Buddhist teachings, secular Buddhist teachings out there to help people. So I would say, for people, buy a book, listen to your podcast. There
There
are.
are others out there too, but and I agree with you. I mean, I told you I started the podcast when I was 65. I just felt, and I did it because I thought, how can I reach more people? People
Yeah,
should hear this stuff. It would really make a difference. How do I do that? And you'd have, like, it was gutsy to become a monastic. I was very intimidated about starting a podcast. It's very technical. It's challenging, especially when you're 65. Although I was an engineer before, so I did have the background because I had broadcasting in my background. So, but the thing is that I really, like, you felt the call to be of service and be a monastic. I felt the call to start a podcast, and I wish, like you say, more people would do it because it's just awesome. And you're right. I don't have a begging bowl, I can't it's all I can do is put it out there, and whatever happens happens. And I market it the best I can, promote it the best I can, but you're right, we do need more. But it doesn't lend itself to for people to put their all into it, especially when they're younger and trying to earn money and stuff. That's harder to do. So thank you
yeah.
for that little bit of advice, and thank you again for your time.
Of course. Well, I hope to see you again. I will be listening to your podcasts, and thank you. This has been so fun.
That's it for a conversation with Ani Lodro. It was a wonderful conversation. There was so much depth to it. She brought so much to this conversation, so much Buddhism we can take home, so much common sense we can take home. So I hope you enjoyed it. Now, a little bit of housekeeping as usual, and as I plugged at the beginning, I really wanted you to hang around to listen to what's coming up. As I have talked about previously, we have opened up our community through Patreon, making it more accessible for all listeners of this podcast who might like a place to hang out with others. I hope you check out the Patreon community, where we offer insight, reflections, Dharma talks, everyday Sangha membership, and podcast extras, plus multiple areas for discussion and support. And now we're offering more on Patreon for all members, including recordings of my Dharma talks during Sangha meetings offered to public Patreon members and Bodhisattva tier level Patreon patrons. Plus, coming soon, we will be offering post-podcast episode reflections to Sangha level Patreon patrons. There are 4 Patreon membership tiers, starting at $3 a month for the Bodhisattva level. $5 a month tier includes Sangha and community membership plus podcast extras. And the $8 a month tier includes a free subscription to the Everyday Buddhism Substack, where you'll find my new book as serial posts, my other podcast, Words from My Teachers. Although new episodes are no longer added to that podcast, all 67 episodes will remain for you to listen to, plus a Zen koans for everyday section and other articles and practice areas. And at the $20 a month level, you can meet with me, Wendy Shinyo Sensei, virtually through Zoom once a month for 1 hour to discuss your spiritual journey and practice, to ask questions, discuss Buddhism, whatever. Sort of to meet with a spiritual friend. The Everyday Sangha practices and learns together on the first Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And there is also a study and sharing gathering for more support on the third Saturday at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Just go to the Everyday Buddhism website and become a community member by joining the Patreon community. Go to www.everyday-buddhism.com and click on the link that says Membership. Or you can join through Patreon at patreon.com/everydaybuddhism. You can subscribe to my Substack as part of the Patreon tier or by itself, where you can find continuing chapters of Living Life as It Is, Looking for a Right View in the Fog of Delusion. Links to joining Patreon and Substack are posted in the show notes. I thank all of you who contribute in any way. This podcast, the community, and Sangha depend on your donations to continue to exist. I do not seek podcast sponsors, do not ask for financial commitments through paid podcast memberships, so my work and the cost needed to support what I do is entirely self-funded, except for your donations. Please consider a one-time or continuing donation through Patreon or on my website's Donate tab. Or just buy me a coffee using the coffee cup link on the website. And thanks to all of you who write in with comments and questions. Another way you can help is to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. You know, it's important to share the podcasts you love with other people. If you find them helpful in your life, let people know. So, if you could, take a minute to comment so people will know why you like or even love Everyday Buddhism. So that's it for the announcements. Until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.